I never believed in ghosts. Not really. I always thought people exaggerated their stories until I moved into that building. It was a small apartment complex in the city. Nothing fancy, but cheap rent. I was new to the area, didn't know anyone, and just needed a place to stay. The landlord was an old woman, barely spoke much, just handed me the keys and muttered, "Don't bother the man in 405. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She wasn't. The first night, I was in apartment 403, just down the hall from 405. That night I heard footsteps outside. Slow, heavy ones, pacing back and forth. I assumed it was a neighbor, but when I checked the peephole, the hallway was empty. I brushed it off. New place, new sounds, no big deal. Then, at around 3 a.m., I heard something else. A knock, not on my door, on 405, 3 slow, deliberate knocks. Tap, 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 then silence. I waited. No one answered. A minute later, another knock. Tap, tap, tap. Still, no one answered. It kept happening. Every night. Always at 3 a.m. I never saw anyone knocking, and I never saw anyone leave or enter. 405. One night I had enough. I decided to stay up and see who was knocking. At exactly 3 a.m., I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. I grabbed my phone, took a deep breath, and slowly opened my door. The hallway was empty. Except, the door to 405 was wide open, no lights inside, just darkness. Then, out of the corner of my eye, a man, standing at the end of the hall, tall, thin, in an old suit, his face blurry, like my eyes couldn't focus on it. I felt cold, my stomach twisted. He tilted his head, as if he knew I was watching. Then, he started walking toward me, slow, deliberate steps. I slammed my door shut. My hands were shaking. My heart was racing. Then I heard it. Tap, tap, tap. On my door. I didn't sleep that night. The next morning, I went straight to the landlord. I told her everything. The knocking, the man, the door being open. She sighed, like she had heard it all before. Then she said something I will never forget. Apartment 405 has been empty for 20 years. I stared at her. That's not possible. Someone's there. She shook her head. Then she told me the story. Years ago, a man lived in 405, kept to himself, always wore the same suit. One day he just stopped coming out. No one saw him for weeks. When the landlord finally opened the door, he was sitting in a chair, dead, like he had been waiting for something. And the strangest part? His body was never removed, at least not officially. The police came, checked everything, but when they went back to take the body, it was gone, just disappeared. I was done. I packed my bags, ready to leave. But that night something happened. At 3 a.m., I woke up, not to knocking, to breathing, right outside my door. Slow, deep, heavy, like someone was standing there waiting. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. Then tap, tap, tap. This time it wasn't on 405. It was on my door. I didn't open it. I sat there, gripping my blanket like a child, praying it would stop. Eventually, it did. The next morning, I left and never came back. I checked online for anything about 405. There were no records of a death, no missing persons. Nothing. It was like the man had never existed. But sometimes, late at night, when I walk past a quiet hallway, I swear I can still hear it. Tap, tap, tap. And hey, if you enjoyed this, make sure to like, subscribe, and hit that bell so you don't miss the next one. Because trust me, the stories, they're only gonna get scarier. I've been driving a taxi for years. I've seen all kinds of people, drunks, cheaters, lost tourists, even a guy who tried to pay me in old coins. But nothing freaks me like the night I picked up a man who never left my car. The call, it It was around 1:30 a.m. I was about to call it a night when I got a request from an area just outside the city. It was a long, dark stretch of road, no houses, no shops, just open fields and trees. I almost declined it, but I was low on money and figured one last ride wouldn't hurt. When I got there, a man was standing by the road dressed in a suit. He looked normal, except for one thing. He wasn't facing me. He was staring into the trees. I rolled down the window. "Taxi?" He nodded, still not turning around. A chill ran down my spine, but I brushed it off. "Where to?" I asked. He finally turned. His face was pale, like he hadn't seen sunlight in years. His eyes, they looked tired. "Just drive," he said quietly. I hesitated but unlocked the door. He got in the back seat, sitting directly behind me. I don't know why, but that made me uncomfortable. Most people sit diagonally, where they can see me, but not him. I started driving. For the first few minutes, it was dead silent. No small talk, no phone scrolling, just him, sitting there. I glanced at the mirror. His hands were resting on his lap. He wasn't blinking much. "Long night?" I asked, trying to ease the tension. No response. I gripped the wheel a little tighter, heading home from work. Still nothing. I checked the rearview mirror again. He was staring straight at me. My stomach dropped. Something was wrong. I cleared my throat. "Hey, buddy, you all right?" Finally, he spoke. "Do you believe in ghosts?" His voice was so flat, so emotionless, that it sent shivers down my spine. I forced a chuckle. "Not really. Why?" He didn't answer. I kept driving, my hands sweaty on the wheel. Then, "Slow down," he said suddenly. I did. The road was empty, but I obeyed, my heart pounding. And then, "Stop here." I looked around. We were in the middle of nowhere, just trees on both sides. No houses, no lights, nothing. I hesitated. "You sure this is where you want to be dropped off?" He nodded. I sighed and pulled over. "All right, man. That'll be." I turned around. The back seat was empty. The door hadn't opened. The seatbelt was still fastened. I felt my breath catch in my throat. I hadn't heard him leave. I hadn't seen him move. He was just gone. My chest tightened as I gripped the steering wheel. I kept telling myself there had to be a logical explanation. Maybe I was just tired. Maybe. Then my phone buzzed. It was the taxi app. Ride completed. Passenger dropped off at final destination. I swallowed hard. I hadn't ended the ride. I checked the rearview mirror again. And I swear to God, for just a second, I saw him sitting there, smiling. I slammed the gas and sped out of there. I didn't stop until I reached the city. I parked under a streetlight, my hands still shaking. I turned around again. The back seat was empty. But there was something. A single black tie, neatly folded on the seat. The next day, I told my friend, another taxi driver. His face went pale. "You picked someone up on that road?" he asked. I nodded. He exhaled sharply. "A driver died there years ago. Picked up a passenger who never existed. Crashed his car trying to get away." I laughed nervously. "You're messing with me." He didn't smile. "I don't drive that road anymore. And sometimes, late at night, I still check my rearview mirror, just in case."